strong. So it became imperative that that big old base would be totally protected at all costs. Go ahead. Now we've gone through and shown a lot of the effect of voltage. Remember the alignment going into molecular elongation, changing the time share rate of the electron, we're liquid to gas ionization state. But we're now going down here to the atomic destabilization of the combustible gas atoms. We need to protect the military integrity of the United States and also the industrial base of this country and all the other countries of the world. You know, Einstein said that if you could release this energy from a gallon of water, or from water, that energy is so tremendous that it could power a 1,000-car train around the earth many, 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 many times. How will we do it? Go ahead. And so in development, if you notice that there are many steps in the development of this technology, and we have to comply with the national security laws. We had to comply with the PCT Treaty Act. We had to comply under the PCT Treaty Act, not only for this country, but other countries who said and request under the PCT Treaty Act, this technology must be protected to our country at all costs. So you see, we're faced with the same problems. So it became imperative that we be protected. Here we're now taking the liberated combustible gas atoms, and we're now going to destabilize it. We're going to take the combustible gas atoms into subcritical state. Now, how much energy does it take to trigger a thermonuclear device? Anybody know? Just about that much energy. All they do is take a subcritical mass here, put it here, and it goes into critical state. Now, in the contemplation of this, how can I tap into this enormous energy source and contemplate it? And the Lord said to me and asked me the question, what would happen if you would prevent the water molecule from forming during thermal gas ignition? You see, we looked at the gas combustion process all of our lives. But we didn't understand, or would not understand, or we would not perceive long enough to say what really is happening in releasing that energy. Now, if I light the hydrogen and oxygen gases, and I prevent the water molecule from forming, normally the hydrogen and oxygen atom comes together, it's releasing energy, is it not? But when the water molecules form, the energy stops. Is it not so? All right? But if I would prevent stability from occurring, what would take place? Well, Lord, one of two things will occur. Energy would continue to re-release until another atom structure is formed, or an implosion effect would occur and release pure energy. But you see, now, during the time, when I was in Washington, D.C. in 1965, the government called in the experts to come up with a fail-safe nuclear power system. In 3 days in the meeting, I got up in the meeting, and unfortunately, I wasn't really right with the Lord at the time. And I said, gentlemen, everything you said is a bunch of BS. There's no substance on the face of this earth that's subject to the hostile environment of nuclear radiation, uranium-238s and 235s. You're going to have the hourglass effect occur. And my prophecy and said longevity is roughly 15 years came true on the 3 Mile Island. Now, we have a worse problem. We talked about, Chernobyl. Are you aware of that in the book of Revelation? It says the wormwood will make the waters bitter and many would die. The Russian word Chernobyl means wormwood. It's a small little bitter root plant that grows over in a valley in Russia. And they always talk about the radiation going in the atmosphere. They went over to North Sweden where they had to kill all of their animals and reindeer. But they don't talk about that in the meltdown it's gone down on the water table. And the water table is continually reacting and being exposed to radiation. Are you aware of that? And now hundreds and thousands and millions of Europeans that are going to be exposed to the radiation of the water table, dumping into the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, are now going to die of cancer being exposed to high radiation. But we got an even worse problem than that. Are you aware of that the reaction is still occurring? All they did was put concrete on top of it and put a little bit of other chemicals on top of it, but it's still in a reaction. If it goes into supernova, when the atomic mass starts to increase, it starts setting up a resonance. You start getting a high resonant pulse frequency, and if it interacts with the electromagnetic field strength of the Earth, if it reacts with the energy grid system of the Earth, guess what you're going to have? You're going to have a secondary explosion that will probably create a crater of about 5 miles across in diameter, about 4 miles deep, and that type of an explosion will possibly deflect the Van Allen belts, which in turn now would flip the Earth. We're on 22.5 degree axis. And at that time an explosion will occur, I will assure you, you'll come out with an electromagnetic pulse wave that will hit every nuclear power plant across Western Europe. And you're going to have a triggering system of all these nuclear power plants are going to start triggering right down the line, because you see, their electronic control systems are not set up to handle a very high intense magnetic pulse wave. And look at France, of all the nuclear plants that they have in existence. You think we don't have a problem that's confronting us? But how do we do it safely? Scientists ran to say, okay, we'll go to nuclear fusion. And so Livermore Laboratory comes up and says, we will expose the hydrogen atom to a high temperature around 10 million degrees. We will be able to subject it to tremendous pressure, and we'll squeeze the hydrogen nuclei to form helium and release energy and release it safely. We'll try to duplicate the sun, but learn to ask the right question. 1/3 of the sun is composed of oxygen atoms. You know, atoms have intelligence like you and I have intelligence, and animals have intelligence. And once you start to understand that, you can start to stimulate and have the atoms react in a certain way. Do you know that there's a unique atom that has the intelligence to be able to release thermal explosive energy more than any other atom on Earth? What is it? It's called the oxygen atom, is it not? Can you have a combustion process without the oxygen atom? It releases thermal explosive energy from other atoms. 1/3 of the sun is composed of oxygen atoms. Scientists don't want to consider the full elements of what's taking place in the sun. Another process that they came up with, and they demonstrated very successful in the university, called the muon process. Anyone ever heard of that? Well, the muon process, you've got the hydrogen nuclei, you got the electron here, right? And so what they do is they took a muon, which is twice the mass size of the electron, which had the characteristic of that, to trick the hydrogen atom to accept the muon, and then get the hydrogen atom to eject its natural electron. And once that occurred, then the muon decays in a billionth of a second. And when it decays, under Einstein's equation, energy equals mass times the square of light, it says whenever you decrease mass, energy yields increased. So when that muon decays, it decreases the mass of the hydrogen atom, does it not? And that energy that's in the nucleus to maintain the orbital velocity of that electron says, under the law of physics, I must what? Stabilize, is it not so? And therefore it releases energy, enormous amounts of energy, and releases it safely. But it's a Cadillac idea. It takes billions of dollars to try to come up with a muon generator to sustain and propagate the system, where you see the muon decays in a billionth of a second. But it was very well demonstrated very successfully in the universities of this country. Now, in the interim period of time in developing the technology, you know, the United States government took a group of scientists out in the Midwest, I don't know if you remember that, gave them $1 billion, $2 billion or so, and said, come up with an answer to the energy problem. The Lord took me down to $3 in my pocket and said, by faith you're going to put an energy system in the country. I said, oh yes, Lord. Recently, the scientists wrote a letter to Congress and informed Congress and said, well, we spent your money, but we don't have an answer to the energy problem. Well, don't worry about it. A little man down in Grove City, Ohio, started out with $3 in his pocket by faith and has a very viable answer to the energy problem. So, sometimes the Lord will confound the wise in order to be able to try to bring technology forward. We see there's a lot of efforts to try to bring and stop this type of technology from getting out in the marketplace. Go ahead. In order to do this, we now develop what we call a hydrogen gun technology, or gas resonant cavity. We're now introducing laser energy into the system. We do not need high energy lasers to accomplish the task. We are using solid state lasers. Those are actually LEDs. If anyone knows about LEDs, do they not in a discrete amount of light frequency? Are they not a solid state laser? And as a result, if you put them together, you can come up with the laser intensity and pulse them in such a way that you're now co-equaling or maximizing the absorption of photon energy into the process. Go ahead, as we're exposing to high voltage. Go ahead. To do this, we now develop the electron extraction circuit. This is where we're taking the liberated electrons and we're now taking it out of the resonant cavity. If I set up an alternate pulse here, for an example, and these negative charged electrons now if I would apply a positive voltage field potential here, would not the negative charge electrons go along this wire, interact with the filament of this light bulb to produce heat energy from light energy? Am I defying the laws of physics? No. If I apply a high voltage pulse to it, those liberated electrons can be taken right out of the resonant cavity. So as these negative charge electrons are going down the wire, have I not complied with the definition of producing electricity? Is not electricity defined as moving electrons down a wire? So the byproduct of the hydrogen fracturing technology to prevent the formation of water molecule from forming during thermal gas ignition, guess what? Is electricity. Now isn't that amazing? It becomes a self-sustained oscillation system. Go ahead. All right, now we got another problem here. There's another uniqueness. You know, Einstein said that if you extend your hands in opposite direction, somewhere along the line your hands are going to meet. Saying that our universe is circular in nature, is it not? Mm-hmm. The red effect in astronomy shows that our galaxy is expanding at an alarming rate, is it not so? In order for our galaxies to expand, mass must be created, right? How is it that you can take a seed of a plant, a little seed, and plant it in the ground, and that seed grows a tree? And it manufactures atoms, and it manufactures molecules, and it manufactures chemical processes, and to sustain life. How is it that that little seed can create mass in the atoms and the molecules? You ever thought about that? You know, normally in the scripture it says the energy comes from the throne of God day and night. So the energy coming into the third dimension is in the form of light energy. And imagine that this is going through an optical fiber optics, and the light energy has a native intelligence on it. And so as it slows down to the third dimension, it now starts the vortex. See, the light energy has intelligence from God. And so the vortexing now occurs, and as it absolutely occurs, guess what? Photon energy is now developed, is it not? And for photon energy, the photon energy now groups together to form the electrons. And now when it forms electrons, it now goes ahead and forms protons. And then the protons go ahead and forms molecules, and the molecules now form chemical processes. And now the chemical processes sustains life as we know it. We talk about ether energy, do we not? How about vacuum energy? We say that in an atom, here's the nucleus and here's the electron, and somewhere along in that area there, if we build and devise a detector, we can use that energy source, can we not? Is that what this conference is all about? How can we tap into this energy source? It's an enormous amount of energy. Wheeler in 1979, I believe, at Princeton University, got a magnetic flux density around 10 to the 93rd power, showing and demonstrating that in fact there is no more question of vacuum energy. It's there. But how do you tap into it? How can you utilize it safely? How can you be able to do it in a way that you can maintain the economies of the world? Well, now to understand this a little bit further, under the law of physics says everything must reach a stable state. Is that not so? Mm-hmm. Right? If I take an atom and I put it in a black box that's not exposed to third-dimensional stimuli like photon energy from the sun, somewhere along the line that atom's got to reach stable state. Is it not so? Now that would mean is that somewhere along the line that electron velocity would have to remain at a constant velocity. Is that not so? Sure. And that constant velocity of the electron says that that atom would reach and maintain in a stable state. But that's illogical. Uh-oh, watch out, Stan. That's illogical. Mm-hmm. Does not that atom have mass? Yeah. Is it not 1/1840th the size of the proton? Mm-hmm. Does it have an electrical charge? Yeah. Does it exhibit an electromagnetic field? Mm-hmm. Does it move through an electric static field? All of those force factors says that the velocity of that electron would eventually slow down in orbital velocity and attach itself to the surface of the proton. Come on, physicists. You know that there are force factors that's opposed to moving that electron. But under the law of physics says it reached stable state. The velocity, the orbital velocity of the electron is constant. How is it then that that electron, which is true, remains at a constant velocity? But the force factor says, no, I'm opposing the movement of that electron. Energy has got to come into that atom somehow to maintain the orbital velocity of that electron. Is it not so? Right. Now, just as our eyes had the abilities to see energy frequencies, which we call light energy, or energy by which we see, does not say that there's not other energy sources that are present. Did we not invent the ultraviolet lens and the infrared lens to detect those frequencies of existence? Just as we have done that, the atom has the abilities to detect energy coming in to the third dimension in order to maintain it. And we call it ether energy, or we call it vacuum space energy, or we call it universal energy coming from the throne of God. Now, the law of physics, we go down in the nucleus and we say the smallest particle inside the nucleus are what? Quarks, right? And we, well, and so.
Well, some
and then
people say that.
Yeah, okay. So we got quarks. Then they say, well, what's holding the quarks together? Well, we got gluons. Well, what the heck is gluons? They're energy pathways. They are. What's maintaining the orbital spin of the nucleus of the atom? Go ahead. We go back to the gyroscopic action of the nucleus of the atom. You know, when you put electrical stress on here, it now translates electrical stress to these orbital particles inside the nucleus, and as a result, just as the forces are opposing the movement of the electron, I'm now using voltage to slow down the movement of that electron, and I'm not. And as I'm deflecting the electron and changing the time rate of the electron, as I'm moving it and slowing it down, am I not now starting to slow down the gyroscopic action within the nucleus? Is that an abnormal condition? Is that not a destabilized condition? And just as the opposition to move that electron and keep it at constant velocity, I'm now using voltage to oppose the movement of the electron. And as the gyroscopic spin within the nucleus, the 100 particles or so, slows down in orbital velocity, then it opens up the energy aperture and allows the energy to come into the atom. Now that energy aperture in vision is this much like that of a black hole in space. Where a black hole is vortexing, is now allowing energy transfer from one dimensional time zone to that of another. There's no secret to it. All you have to do is understand the triggering process, the native intelligence of the combustible gas atoms to get it accomplished. How is it that you can get energy and release it in the gas combustion process? Where's the energy coming from? You know, when I presented this to 79 of the lead scientists of the world at Geneva, and when they realized that we were doing voltage, guess what the questioner was asking? Where's the energy coming from? We assume it was being consumed or absorbed from the electron, but you're restricting the electron. Where's the energy coming from? Well, scientists of the world and presented the elite physicists of China and the rest of them there, it's coming from the throne of God. It's coming in the third dimension. It's coming through the nucleus of the atom. And then the energy is now be transferring out to the electron level and allowing the electrons to go to a higher energy state, K, L, M, and N, and O orbits. Go ahead. Ah, boy. Lord, you're really doing something good. You see, we've got to release this high energy in such a way that we don't have gamma radiations. That we don't have harmful radiations. But we're duplicating the same energy release as the combustible gas atoms are normally. But we're just setting up a condition to not allow the hydrogen and oxygen atom to completely form in a water molecule, to allow this energy to be released. Now, by exposing the combustible gas atoms to a high voltage, you're restricting amps. Now, you're not allowing amp flow to go into the process. Remember, we're restricting it. Therefore, we're using the opposite voltage potential, and when you put the electrical stress from the electrons transferring in to the nucleus, you're now oscillating the energy aperture. You are now bringing it into a non-stable state, and what happens is that when you apply this opposite voltage potential, you're oscillating the energy aperture, and the energy coming in the third dimension, it says to the atom, I need this additional energy, and it comes in. Now when you terminate that voltage, the aperture closes, and it's a one-way valve. And you know the potential of energy coming in is greater than the third dimension. Now, to tell you a little bit more about the existence of this, you know, an electron...
No time for discussion.
You've got about 5 minutes.
12
2
minutes.
minutes.
Oh my. Oh boy.
No time for discussion. I wish to pose the
Okay.
questions.
What we're doing now is oscillating the energy aperture. It's a one-way valve. It's allowed to come in. To a nuclear device, you can take an electron, you can run it through a resistor, you release an X amount of heat. The proton is 1,840 times greater in size than that of the electron, so that energy going through destroying a proton or taking the energy from it is 1,840 times greater. So normally there's not enough energy in 1 cubic foot of mass to blow up anything. Basically what happens is the uranium's 238s and 235s, they group the protons together to form the vortexing of the energy, and when they detonate it and bring it into critical state, all they're doing is ripping open the energy aperture and allowing the flood of energy to come in. Another way to prove this out, ask the question of how energy is really being developed through the lightning, when lightning is, a bolt of lightning is going through the sky, or across the sky. Go ahead. All right, now we're doing the same thing with the oxygen atom.
Let's discuss a little bit the technical side of your invention. We are interested in the technical side.
Well, that's what I'm doing. So if you be quiet, I'll go on. Otherwise, you can leave, and then I'll go on. Right? So now we're exposing the combustible gases as well as the oxygen atom. We are now priming the combustible gas atoms to a very high energy state. Go ahead. Prior to gas ignition. Go ahead. Now this is an example of that we're adding photon energy to the process. We're now priming it by the energy process, universal energy. We're now causing it, plucking off the electron. So we're taking the combustible gas atoms now in a very high critical state, which now we're priming it, we're setting the condition, we're processing hydrogen oxygen atoms, and we're now going to trigger it. It's a triggering process. Go ahead. And now we've set the condition on the hydrogen fracturing process. So just the same thing as we had on the muon process. Note that on the muon process, we were plucking the electron. You remember? Mm-hmm. This was ejecting its natural electron. We went to a muon, as you see here, and it decayed. And therefore, we decrease mass, energy equals mass times the square of light. We decrease it and allow energy yield to increase. Now, what are we doing here? All of a sudden, we plucked off 4 electrons of the oxygen atom. We have added laser energy to it to prevent the atom, the oxygen atom, to go back from stable state. Is that a normal state?
No.
No. Therefore, we're now exposed the hydrogen atom to photon energy. And what happens is that when it absorbs it, it causes the electron to migrate farther away from its nucleus. As a result, is not the electrical attraction force between the electron and the nucleus weakened. So therefore, the hydrogen atom is weakened. So when he and I go out on the basketball court, he's the hydrogen atom, and I'm the big oxygen atom, and I zap him with laser energy. Zap. Now he's in a weakened state. You see his electrons migrated farther away from his nucleus. Now, I'm the big gigantic oxygen atom, right? I'm 8 times bigger than you. But I have 4 missing electrons. And you don't like us. And so you ignite the gas, and you come to me to stabilize. And your basketball is electron, and I need to stabilize in the process. And when that happens, all of a sudden I see your electron, and I latch on your electron because I want to stabilize. And so my positive charge protons react in your positive charge nuclei. And when I latch on your electron, who's going to win out? Me or him? I'm going to win. Now,